Welcome, everyone. I'm going to, I'll just do a welcoming intro for a few minutes while we get everybody on board and up and running. So there's Karen. Hello, Karen. Thank you for what you sent yesterday. That was also very interesting. Wait a minute, let me make sure I can see everybody. Gallery, there we go. So my name is Martin Bush. I'm on the coordinating committee of SCAN, also the education committee. And this is a joint effort between several committees, I think, overall. So we will get started in just a minute I don't like this initial period where we all sort of look at each other wondering who's going to speak first. So that's why I'm going to say a few words. I think we've got, who have we got? We've got 34 people here and present. I'm just going to mention a few admin requirements, mainly the chat and the Q&A. So the chat, please, is only for exchanging information or links to interesting articles that may have some reference to what we will be discussing and talking about today. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. So basically, we will be monitoring the Q&A for questions after Michael has been speaking. So that's given us a minute or so. I think the majority of people, no, I think we're only up to about half of them. So we'll hang on for a few more seconds just to let stragglers arrive. Put it back. Somebody keeps switching me out of gallery. I like to see everybody. So
That's me doing that, Martin. I'm just spotlighting the people that will be talking.
okay, I thought it was you, Helen. Yeah.
And
Okay.
when people are spotlighted, Martin, it automatically goes to speaker view, so you just have to switch yourself back.
Okay, so I'm learning as I go along, as usual. So let's have a look at the second screen. Up to 37. It's 2:02. I think we're ready to go. So I'm going to pass the parole, as they say in Montreal, over to Jim. And Jim will be introducing his friend and colleague, Michael. So over to you, Jim.
Hi, everybody. It's really nice to see you all here, and I think we'll have a few more people dropping in as we get started. But yeah, I get to introduce Michael Barnard. I'm a retired professor from University of Lethbridge who published in mostly in climate solutions, and so through that work, got to know Michael pretty well. So let me just go forward. Michael Barnard is recognized around the world for his work on practical decarbonization technologies, policies, and programs that operate at real scale. I've had the pleasure of getting to know Mike personally over the years. And one of my favorite things to do actually when I get out to BC is we enjoy a few good BC beers and have some really great long conversations about engineering, about markets, and about what actually works in climate. And I think we often, get into what doesn't work, but that's the more grumpy side. So let's stay upbeat here. Mike brings that curiosity and rigor to those conversations, and he brings that to his global advisory work. Mike has routinely engaged with executives, investors, policymakers on pathways to decarbonization that can be deployed now, not decades in the future, but things that work now. He's certainly not shy about engaging in very difficult or controversial debates. I've read some negative reviews about Mike, but they're all fibs. He's published many well-researched analyses that challenge unsupported claims from industry, from government, from NGOs. His work examines the real-world viability of solutions, and that includes, some fossil fuels. What is there ways to make natural gas, LNG, carbon capture, hydrogen, nuclear energy meet our current and future needs? And I think, just search Mike's name on any of those topics and you can get a really wonderful article to read about those things. So through his writing and advisory efforts, Michael contributes to an evidence-based conversation about how experienced citizens can apply their knowledge, resources, and networks to accelerate the clean energy transition. I'm really pleased to welcome my friend and colleague on behalf of all of us, on behalf of SCAN and ORASA. Very pleased to welcome Mike, my friend and colleague, to speak today to our group. Thanks so much for being here, Michael.
Oh, thank you, Jim. And I'm looking forward to having more beers with you when you're next in Vancouver. I might not make it to Lethbridge. I will also say that not all the critiques of me were fibs. One of the extensive ones did point out that I was married in Las Vegas, and that's true. If anybody wants to know that, put the question in the Q&A, and the moderators won't accept it as a choice. Okay, so this is a cross-Canada audience. And so what that means with dozens of Canadians is we have people from all over the world in the audience. Just in the short group here, we have different accents because we're a nation of immigrants. I'm second generation. My dad immigrated here. And many of us have lived all over the world as well. I've lived on 3 or 4 continents, and I've visited 60 or so cities globally. And so part of my way I look at solutions is I look around the world looking for pockets of the future where solutions are scaling. And then I look at the conditions for success for those things scaling and see which ones can actually expand. So it's a diffusion question. And part of my practice is to accelerate the rate of diffusion of solutions where the test has already been run. And a lot of this is based upon the work of Vancouver author William Gibson. He's a speculative science fiction author, did the Neuromancer series, did a bunch of great books, pattern recognition series. And his aphorism, "The future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed," speaks to me. It's something that I apply professionally. I go say, okay, if the future is already here, I don't have to reinvent it. I don't have to test it here. I can go and look at where it's being tested at scale and then say, can it be applied here without more testing? Yes, it can. And then I bring those pockets of future to assist my clients and those proof points to break the barriers and the parochialism that so often afflicts us. The not invented here syndrome is not my favorite syndrome, along with NIMBYism. And with that, the first pocket of the future. About 10 kilometers from where I'm sitting, there's a brand new student residence at BCIT. It's 12 stories, it's 500 beds, and it's mass timber. Mass timber, for those of you who don't know, is basically plywood on steroids. You can make structural beams with it, you can make floors with it, you can make walls with it, and it goes together like Lego. Now, mass timber's got a lot of advantages because you can cut out the windows in the factory, you can route the wiring and the water lines in the factory. It has 5 times the structural strength by mass as reinforced concrete. So a building weighs 1/5 as much for the same volume enclosed. What that does, among other things, it means the foundation has to have only 30% of the reinforced concrete. You can also put mass timber buildings on top of existing buildings where you can't build upwards anymore. It's a big thing globally to add density to downtown cores by putting mass timber floors on top of existing buildings. Now, we, Canada, happen to be a leader in mass timber. We have 700 mass timber construction buildings of various types in the country. I've been to a few of them. Last year, I did a report on mass timber as an industrial policy for Canada. It was about, I think, 100 pages or 130 pages or something, that aligned with Mark Carney's housing policy. Mark Carney's housing policy, sadly, did not preserve the original $13 billion budget, but did preserve $7 billion budget, which is expected to be extended a lot by private investment and different types of capital coming in. Now, his program is going to, and this is a kind of a pattern globally, his program is going to support social housing for the bottom 20% of Canadians by putting in multi-unit residential buildings that are mass timber and that are prefabricated in factories. That provides a base load income for mass timber factories that enables creation of regional hubs for mass timber, which enables other builders to use mass timber less expensively. Because most of our mass timber buildings up till now have been one-offs globally. And that means they have to, we haven't established and scaled the industry as much as we should, even though there are, as I said, hundreds of buildings around. If you have a baseline factory with solid annual revenue guaranteed for years, then everybody else can just pile onto that and get those for the same price. That will drive the price point down. Up till now, it's been about 20% adder capital expense for constructing a building. And with scaling and industrialization, that goes away. Now, there's some other ways it goes away. Canada is also not quite leading, but we're certainly a close follower on embodied carbon limits for buildings. An embodied carbon limit says per cubic meter of materials, you got to be under X tons of CO2. Now, for those of you who've paid any attention to cement and steel, you'll know they're carbon bombs. And so reinforced concrete, which is full of cement and steel, is actually a carbon bomb. And remember, we need 5 times the mass. Now, mass timber is actually inverse. Every ton of mass timber, while having as much structural strength as reinforced concrete, embodies a ton of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. The tree, as it's growing, breathes in carbon dioxide, breathes out the oxygen, keeps the carbon as structural material. It's like carbon fiber, natural carbon fiber. Quite amusing. Now, in Canada, we count the forests towards our carbon approval, so we don't double count the mass timber. But still, as we electrify forestry, which we're already doing, we've got electric logging trucks in British Columbia, as we electrify sawmills, which is already being done, as we electrify distribution with electric trucks, which is already being done, as we electrify construction equipment, which is being done, the carbon debt of a building approaches zero with mass timber. We've still got the reinforced concrete for the foundation, but it's a fraction of the embodied carbon. For any new building, embodied carbon is one of the most critical factors to consider. And then energy, of course, needs to be electrified with heat pumps and the like. So this is a pocket of the future, and it's in Canada. But I'm not going to stop with Canada. I am going to start the next thing, though, with what are the filters? So in addition to, where are pockets of the future and can they spread? The other filters I have is for any technology, will it work? As Jim knows, I get nerdy about the STEM stuff. I get nerdy about the engineering. I get nerdy about the chemistry. I've rebuilt my brain for chemical process engineering. One of my engagements last year was to do a techno-economic assessment of polymetallic nodule seabed mining. And I engaged an Edmonton-based mining engineer as the other half for some of those things. So I keep expanding my STEM incompetence beyond the point where it's remotely reasonable. It's not my only point of amazing arrogance. I also do projections of major climate problem areas out through 2100. I will say, I have the other thing I always say is, I don't claim to be right. I just claim to be less wrong than most. So I do try to invert the arrogance a bit if I can. And I admit when somebody points out that I'm wrong. So will it compete? This is the economic thing. If you've got 7 solutions, I can count on my fingers, and 3 of them are cheap and 4 of them are expensive, the 3 that are cheap are the ones that are going to scale globally. It's really basic. If something's cheaper and does the job and has the conditions for success, it works, then it's going to be the one that scales. It's a really simple economic test. And my third economic test, I don't have kids and I don't watch major league sports, so I have lots of time to fill my brain with stuff. And one of the things I filled my brain with is cognitive science and social acceptance of technologies and transformation. And so will humans accept it? For this audience, I'll just say, one thing that has been suggested by various people is cutting the population of the Earth down to 2 billion. And I just say, Humans aren't going to accept that. Another one that people often recommend is everybody in the world has to become a vegetarian. And I'd say, well, that kind of fights human nature. So let's decarbonize beef instead. And, substitute chicken wherever possible. And yes, substitute protein wherever, vegetable protein wherever possible. But let's not expect everybody in the world to become a vegetarian. It's just unlikely. So the filters, will it work? Will it compete? Will humans accept it? Mass timber hits those points. It works. It's cost competitive. More than that, it's time competitive. You have to wait for a reinforced concrete building. You have to wait a week for the reinforcing the higher speed concrete to set sufficiently to put the next floor up. But with mass timber, Lego, buildings can go up a lot faster if you're using structural beams with mass timber, because as soon as they're locked in place, they have the structural strength for the next floor. So you can accelerate delivery and also reduce impact on local roads because they're a fifth the mass rolling over them. So what else? Let's go to the other side of the world, Pakistan, where I've spent time talking to people. Thankfully, virtually. I love talking to people in other parts of the world. I don't love 36 hours of jet travel anymore. So in 2024, people like me who were just kind of paying attention started to notice something weird going on in the country. What was weird was that we were just hearing reports of gigawatts of solar panels landing and being put up. And the beginning of 2025, it was all counted up. They brought in 17 gigawatts of solar panels. They had YouTube channels saying how to put them up, and everybody had slapped them on every flat surface. Now, this is Pakistan. You may not know this about Pakistan, but it's one of the global leaders for textiles manufacturing. And so most of the textile mills and factories in the country are now running mostly off solar power. This was for two reasons. One, the government got out of the way. There's a 10% tariff on Chinese solar panels. They didn't have regulations about people installing themselves. They didn't have inspections required. They didn't have pre-approval by City Hall required. They didn't have a government that was anti-Chinese, particularly because Belt and Road Initiative is strong there. China built the HVDC backbone that runs north to south in Pakistan, for example, and helped them with reconductoring all of their lines. So that was amazing. And then in 2025, they repeated it, another 15 gigawatt of solar. Now, for context, 32 gigawatts is 6 times all the solar in Canada. Canada has 11 times the land mass and a quarter of the people. We have absurd amounts of space for solar. We could be coating everything with solar panels and solving our energy crisis. And Pakistan is just going ahead and doing it and making us look a little bit tardy. So, pocket of the future. There's an interesting proof point. I checked because this amazing amount of solar could have been matched by an amazing amount of battery storage behind the meter, because this is mostly behind the meter solar that was going in. Well, Pakistan left a 40% tariff on Chinese batteries. And as a result, only about a quarter as much capacity, respectively, occurred there. So there's less time shifting of electricity. There's a lot more solar peaks, and they're accommodating around that. But this is 32 gigawatts of solar is a massive amount of generation capacity. And it's not the only thing they're doing. BYD is building a car company in Pakistan. So they're going to have electric cars from China manufactured in the country long before Canada does. They have a lot of them depend on two-wheelers, and many entrepreneurs are importing two-wheel kits from China, slapping Pakistan brands on them, and now the country's two-wheelers are rapidly going electric because it's cheaper. And they're, guess what, charging at home or at the office or at the workplace because they got solar everywhere. So the entire ecosystem is leapfrogging rapidly. And so let's stay, in down south, or at least south of here, which describes most of the world. Africa, I spent a bunch of time going into different African countries and looking at solution spaces. I've looked at shipping green hydrogen from Namibia to Europe. I was engaged to look at the Maghreb countries of Morocco, Algeria, and Egypt, and European plans to do green hydrogen manufacturing for export to Europe. I was engaged to do a report on that, did that 2 or 3 years ago. I've spoken to energy entrepreneurs in Kenya about pumped hydro in the country and about the weakness of the grid and the necessity of buffering with large grid storage. And I've spent time reading books like the How China Escaped the Poverty Trap by Yuan Ang. Strongly recommended. So I think from 2016. It's a bit of a corrective to Why Nations Fail by the 2 Nobel Prize winning economists, which kind of dismissed China in 5 pages of arm waving without a lot of insight. Now, I got, after I think 10 years of looking at different things in Africa, to the point where I felt I could say something about the entire continent. Because I've coached people to say, stop saying you know Africa if you spent time and looked at one thing. Because I've looked at Belt and Road initiatives, I've looked at transmission corridor initiatives, I've looked at a whole bunch of stuff across the continent. I feel comfortable and read a bunch more stuff. There's this interesting thing going on there. Last year, they put in 2.5 gigawatts of solar, which once again is half of all the solar Canada has so far. My projection is this year they'll do 20 gigawatts, and next year they'll do a lot more. And the reasons are very simple. First of all, the 55 countries and 1.4 billion people are now a free trade zone. That's what that AFCTA thing is. So they're like the EU, but without a common currency. Now, that was established in 2019, and they're still working out governance. So it's not perfect, but they're eliminating border barriers to labor and goods movement, and we'll end up in a place that's probably lower barriers to entry than interprovincial in Canada. So 1.4 billion people, average age 20. So, as opposed to our 40 to 43, I think it is. So we're somewhere in that range demographically. But China's also been there. They're doing Belt and Road stuff. So they've built 13 ports. So there's strong ports. They've built 12,000 kilometers of highway for road freight transportation. There's a 10,000, or I think it's a several thousand kilometer logistical railway system that they've refurbished. It had been built for minerals extraction decades ago and was falling apart, and China cleaned it up. And they assisted with building high-speed rail in Morocco. There's more high-speed rail in Africa than there is in Canada. Now, they also have governance improvements. One of the things I got out of How China Escaped the Poverty Trap was the story of Botswana. Yuan Ang's economic research, like that of How Nations Fail, was focused on the establishment of the growth criteria for a mature middle-income country, and where the much Western intervention in the developing world attempted to bring fully mature governance programs from the West and deploying them as is in the developed country. What she observed in country after country, including Botswana, was first there were markets and there was good enough governance. And then the markets got better and made them more affluent. And then they improved the governance. And then the markets got bigger and better and they got improved the governance. So now Botswana, with the same challenges that most African nations face of impoverished soil and the same genetic feedstock as everybody in sub-Saharan Africa, the same languages, is now a middle-income country that's well-governed and a stable democracy. And so they have a local example, and they have now there's an international practice of good enough governance and market creation to stabilize and improve countries. This is part of a global good governance spread that Kishore Mahbubani, the former lead diplomat for Singapore, has written about in his provocatively titled "Has the West Lost It?" I think it was, from 2019. He documents a bunch of the stuff, and he talks about the bad governance that's emerging in the West and the good governance that's emerging in the rest of the world, especially Asia. Everybody in Asia is kind of like looking at the West and going, really? Why are you doing that? And so they have the local example, they have the free trade stuff, and then there's the next bit. China is going to be probably dropping from 300 gigawatts of deployment of solar in 2025 to 200 because of grid rules. Once again, that's 60 times as much solar as all of Canada has in a single year, to only 40 times as much as Canada has in a single year. Those solar panels have got to go somewhere. I think a lot of them are going to go to Africa. There's about 1 million people in the Chinese diaspora networks in Africa. One of the books I read recently was China's Second Continent, the Belt and Road Initiative and the Chinese diaspora that we certainly enjoy here in Canada. Like I live in Vancouver, and I was just walking through a mall in Burnaby, and the mall in Burnaby, everything was a Chinese outlet. It was fascinating. I thought it was in Richmond, which was truly that kind of stuff. How do I put my hand down? And so this clean energy flywheel, there's going to be solar imports. Those million entrepreneurial Chinese people are going to be pulling in container loads of cheap solar, as they already are. They're going to be pulling in millions of electric two-wheelers, which they already are. Kenya has battery swapping for electric two-wheelers in Nairobi and other places, so that it's actually, they're leapfrogging transportation and energy, just as they leapfrogged to cellular and didn't go any landline communications. So this is not a solar panel or two or a solar lantern, in a shack. This is going to be industrial scale power and transportation scale power for the rapidly building out, flowing across borders with with no labor mobility issues and no goods mobility issues. It's going to be messy, and but it's going to be fast. And so now to another country south of us here. This is actually, I'll say again, this is really easy, and I'll probably stop saying it. But there are some countries which are kind of north of us coming up. India. Now, for those of you who spent any time dealing with rail or even looking at rail corridors in North America, one of my previous clients was Canadian National Railway, you'll note that there's no overhead wires. There's no pantographs going up to draw electricity into locomotives. We are a seriously weird outlier globally. India, and by the way, India has virtually 100% of its domestic freight goes by rail. India started 15 years ago, and they're at 99.7% rail electrification. The last little bits are, the really hard, weird stuff, and they're trailing, and the momentum is gone because they've got 99.7% rail electrification. Now, that's not the only thing they're doing, but as we look around the world, China's at about 80%, and all of its 48,000 kilometers of high-speed rail is electrified. Indonesia's high-speed rail is electrified. Yes, Indonesia has more high-speed rail than Canada does as well. As a matter of fact, Indonesia has more than North America does. Morocco's high-speed rail is electrified. Japan's high-speed rail is electrified. Europe's high-speed rail is electrified. Almost, I think we're at 62% last time I checked. All of Europe's rail is electrified, and all of the economic testing of it has shown that wires for the bits that are cheap to electrify and batteries to cross bridges and go through tunnels that weren't wired initially is the cheapest form of moving energy for these things. Electrifying rail that isn't electrified today isn't expensive if you put batteries on them and bridge the expensive bits with batteries instead of wires. And that's being now done globally as a pattern. The UK, for example, are spending 3 times as much as they need to per kilometer because they are electrifying tunnels, which they have to raise, and bridges, which they have to close and often rebuild in order to put wires over them. If you take out those constraints, the cost per kilometer drops up to a third of that. And so that's what the pattern that's coming out of this space. In North America, we have structural problems. The rails are owned privately, not by the governments. That's unique globally. The companies are all governed by shareholder-only fiduciary rules. And that means that they are only responsible for shareholder returns and cannot consider any other stakeholders. That's driven a quarterly analyst call mentality into all North American major corporations, which means they can't do a strategic investment. Among other things, it means the North American locomotive stock is very old because they're allowed to be less efficient. If they have to buy new ones, they're more expensive because they're required to be more efficient. So they're keeping stock from the 70s on the rails and polluting more because they can't get past their board of directors and their shareholders. So in North America, my projection is, well, they're getting rid of a third of all revenue because a third of their total tonnage is coal. That's obviously going away. Another 70,000 cars are oil. That's going away. They are not going to be electrified, while road freight electric trucking is already lower carbon per kilometer than rail is today. And so they're going to be seeing major people like Amazon who are demanding low ton kilometers CO2e. They're going to shift to electric trucks, which are emerging quite rapidly. And so they're going to lose the valuable container stuff. They're going to lose revenue. And they have more, we have twice the kilometers per ton of freight as other major geographies. We have really long tracks for the amount of freight we put across them, probably about double. So they're just going to go bankrupt. They'll be nationalized, and in about 20 years, we'll get around to rail electrification, but that's what it's going to take. So that's where we are. Okay, down to Latin America, Bogota in Colombia, where I've been. I was there in 2012, and I have to say the air sucked. They had poor emissions on their diesel vehicles and their cars. Unlike Sao Paulo, where I was based, there's no corn ethanol. There was no sugarcane ethanol in vehicles, so the air was quite polluted. And they're in a bit of a place where they get inversions, so it was a kind of a multitude of problems. But now they have one of the biggest electric bus fleets outside of China. 1,500 electric buses operating on the road. Did I mention? I think I've said more than Canada a few times. That's a lot more than Canada has or has on order. And they already have them operating there. And you'll notice this is a triple bus. This is a triple articulated bus. This is the biggest type of mass transit bus that exists, and it's a battery electric bus. They made it a core requirement. And they're not alone. Santiago in Chile has an equivalent scale of electric buses. We see in, I think it's Kenya, has 14,000 electric buses on order. As we go around the world, the developing world, as they electrify transit and increase transit, they're leaping straight to battery electric buses. And the reasons are really simple. No air pollution, very cheap operating costs, and they have a significant portion of their foreign exchange problem is purchasing petroleum from abroad. It's typically a huge line item in the economies, and every ton of petroleum products they don't import saves them foreign reserves, essential for balancing their economy and stabilizing their own currencies. This is just another driver for electrification. Now, of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention China when it comes to electric buses. They have about 700,000 of them. Shenzhen had 16,000 itself 5 years ago. Um, they're electrifying their bus fleets so rapidly. I'll also mention Harbin. Does anybody, just in case, if anybody likes ice sculptures and ice cities, make at least look up Harbin, Harbin, China. It's kind of like the Edmonton of China in terms of climate, maybe further north, maybe the winter peg of China. And every year for 2 months, it has a complete multi-hectare scale ice city, ice bars, ice restaurants, ice sculptures, international ice sculpture competition. And the reason I bring Harbin up is that all of its buses are electric. They said, oh, we're a winter city, so we're actually going to insulate our buses. And we're going to actually use heat pumps on them. And we're going to actually use radiant heaters like the ones on patios in our buses to keep people warm. And they do just fine. For any of you who are in Edmonton or just south of Edmonton, as Jim is, Edmonton's current hydrogen bus trial, all the complaints about hydrogen buses in Canada and winter are because New Flyer doesn't know how to make battery electric buses. So electric buses, global, pocket of the future, score. They work, they compete. People accept them. People love them. They're quiet and they don't stink. And further south, and another form of mass transit. This is the Bukyu bus, China Zorilla. China Zorilla was a famous Uruguayan actress. She's kind of like the Meryl Streep of Latin America, as I understand it. I obviously haven't watched a lot of her movies because much as I tried, I failed miserably to learn Spanish or Brazilian Portuguese. I became briefly fluent in, briefly conversational in Brazilian Portuguese, but I've lost it all. So they named this after her. This thing is going to go 5 times a day between Buenos Aires and Uruguay at 25 knots. It's the scale of the Spirit class ferries in British Columbia, the biggest ferries in Canada. It's a medium scale roll-on, roll-off passenger and freight vehicle. It has a capacity of 2,100 passengers and about 300 cars, or the equivalent of trucks. This is a catamaran that's being built in Tasmania, or it has been built in Tasmania. It's undergoing final sea trials now, and it's going to be delivered to Uruguay. And when it charges up in Uruguay, it's going to be charging up on virtually 100% green energy because Uruguay has leapfrogged, as much of Latin America has, to 100% renewables. Uruguay is far from the only country that has done that. They're buying it not because it's good for the environment or because it doesn't make their passengers ill from the smell of marine diesel, but because it's going to pay for itself in 7 years. It's got a 7-year payback on a 30-year hull because it's filled with electrons. And as I say, it's the same size as our Spirit class out here, and it's faster. This is just an example. There's one on order for Northern Europe that's bigger. It has twice the number of cars and a couple more hundred people. 70% of ferries right now on order globally have electric drivetrains. The ones we ordered out here are the Island class, which are about the quarter of the capacity of this. They're hybrid, but only until we can get shore power to all the docks, and then they become 100% electric. And if it was just ferries, you'd say, so what? But what about container ships? So in China right now, there are 2 700 container capacity container ships plying 1,000-kilometer routes on the Yangtze River. That's 1,000 kilometers, and they're battery electric. And you say, okay, well, how do they do that? Well, there's 36 containers of batteries scattered up and down the ports they stop at. And when they stop at a port, they winch off the depleted batteries. They plug them in, just as they plug in refrigerated containers in the terminal to charge, and they winch full ones back on. And it's just the same as everything else. It's just like winching any container on and off. Container ships already have people whose job it is, crew members whose job it is, to plug in refrigerated containers when they get loaded in. And they load refrigerated containers typically at the lowest point of capacity anyway. This is just more of the same. And so there's in container management solutions, there's about, I think, 5 or 6 major vendors. It's add a new container type and a new status type. And then it gets fed by stuff. I will say that ports are increasingly, all container movement in ports is increasingly fully electrified as well. I know this because I dealt with Sahar Rashid Begi, who is the person responsible for Maersk for their APM terminals division. They have about 75 of the concessions of the 95 container ports in the world. She was responsible for port decarbonization globally. And so I dealt with her on electrification. She was responsible for the APM terminals, CATL, the big Chinese battery company, joint venture for batteries for ports. That was undoubtedly part of the discussion because Maersk also had a joint venture last year with Maersk, where they become the logistics arms for CATL, and CATL provides the batteries for all of Maersk's ships. The Maersk McKinney, et cetera, Center for Marine Decarbonization recently released a report saying, oh, batteries are going to work in big ships. They finally kind of got the message. And so I'm just wondering about my timing here. I might be speaking too long. I'll speed up a little bit. But yeah, so hundreds of container ships, it's going to grow. All inland shipping, all nearshore shipping is just going to electrify. Deep sea shipping is going to hybridize. We can see that globally from the way things are working. Now here's a big drone and a weird silver ball on a transmission line in Norway, somewhere north of us, kind of, for parts of Canada. For anybody in Toronto, Norway's north of you. That's a Heimdall neuron. It is a part of dynamic line rating kit. The heavy lift drone drops it in place. It clamps in place automatically. It's powered by induction from the line. So it doesn't have any batteries. It just uses the current that's flowing through it to induce electricity. It has 3 things. It has a mesh network communications link, so it can communicate back to the mothership. It has an ambient temperature gauge, and it has a line temperature gauge. When we built transmission and distribution in decades past, we had no clue. We had guesses and engineering. So for any of you who are power engineers, please don't take this as a diss. Amazing work. But we had engineering rules of thumb. We knew the materials that were in there, and we knew the ambient temperatures, and they had tables to look up how much electricity they could push through a line at different temperatures before it sagged too much and either shorted out or caused fires, as has happened in California. The wires we put in place are steel and copper. When steel and copper gets warm, it sags. That's just physics. Now, with the temperature sensors and AI inference of dynamic line rating, you can actually, and our much better weather models, which can get down to square kilometer microclimate temperatures, we have a much better sense of ambient temperatures and line temperatures and can push a lot more electricity through lines without tripping over line sag, because we know. So back in the room, they can actually push 30% more electricity through some lines with dynamic line rating technologies, existing lines. In one case, they decommissioned the parallel transmission line because they didn't need it. They could get enough electricity through a single line. But that's not the only thing we're doing. I mentioned the materials. Reconductoring is taking the old steel and copper lines and replacing them with carbon fiber and annealed aluminum lines. Annealed aluminum because if you heat aluminum, it anneals, so you just pre-anneal it, and then its characteristics don't change when it's in use after a period of time. The carbon fiber prevents it from sagging at all because carbon fiber doesn't sag when it gets warm. The aluminum is much lighter, So we can actually put much higher capacity lines on the same pylons and put a lot more juice through the lines. And when we build new transmission, we can put the pylons further apart and make the entire transmission line lower cost. So modern, now right now TCS is the poster child for this in North America, except Pakistan has already reconductored about 70% of its lines. Gesundheit. The reason they've done that is because, well, you might have heard of this thing called global warming, and you might remember that they're much closer to the equator than we are. It's a hot country getting hotter, so they were having a lot more problems with their lines. So it just made sense for them to reconductor fast. There's one study that shows with dynamic line rating and other grid enhancing technologies, the United States could achieve 85% of all of its increased capacity needed for its full electrification just with those technologies and no new transmission or new distribution lines. It's game-changing tech. It goes up. And will people accept a line being replaced on an existing transmission line? Yeah. Will they accept a drone putting a ball like that on an existing line in their neighborhood? Yeah. Will they accept a new transmission line? In North America and Europe, evidence is no. So big part of the technology stack. Okay, back to the north. This is in Denmark. This is an AI rendition of a seasonal thermal energy storage solution. Dunlingen, I think it's called. Basically, they take solar heat in the summertime and they put it underground and they take it back out in the wintertime with heat pumps. And lest you think that this is not a Canadian example, for those of you who know where Okotoks, am I getting that right, Jim? Okotoks, Alberta? So is
You
that
bet.
north or south? Is that north or south of you, Jim?
A little north, just south of Calgary.
Yep. So Okotoks, Alberta, about 19 years ago, put one of these in place. And for 17 years, it actually leveled off and was giving them 92% of all their winter heating for the community. And then then they didn't maintain it properly. And about 2 years ago, being Alberta, they ditched it, decommissioned it, and started heating with natural gas again. Can't win them all, but we used to have an example in Canada. Now, this is not a solitary example. In the Netherlands, where I spent a week with the transmission system operator helping with 2050 scenario planning last year, they have 3,000 aquifer thermal energy storage systems. 3,000. That means they drill down into pre-existing aquifers and they pump heat in the summertime and they pump cold in the wintertime and they balance them thermally and they get cheaper heat in the winter and cheaper cooling in the summer. So this is a highly scaled technology. I didn't think it would work. When I started looking at this, at all geothermal globally as part of a deep dive last year, pardon the phrase, I didn't think seasonal thermal energy storage was a thing. I was wrong. It's a huge thing. It's a global thing. It's a very accessible thing. And with directional drilling from the oil and gas industry, it's a much easier to achieve thing. We can actually get down to 600-meter thermals that are hotter and brackish brine where we don't have environmental concerns about fresh water. We're not depleting groundwater or changing groundwater chemistry. And we can get there from 7 kilometers away. So big pocket of the future. Okay. I'm a weird guy. If I have a question, if a question occurs to me or somebody asks me an interesting question, I find it hard to rest until I've answered it. It's like, some people wake up in the morning and think, what am I going to do for pickleball today? Who am I going to be playing? How am I going to destroy them? I wake up in the morning and say, what's aluminum doing in China? And then I go up and figure it out. And so, big surprise, 60% of all aluminum in the world is manufactured inside China. For anything in the world that you think of that's manufacturable, the question you should ask yourself, are they manufacturing half of it or more than half of it? And with aluminum, it's more than half. And it's a big CO2 emissions thing. Aluminum needs about 13 megawatt hours of electricity per ton of aluminum. We do it in Canada next to hydro dams. A lot of it's done in Quebec, for example. But in China, well, they didn't have any hydro dams when they needed a lot of aluminum. But they did have a lot of bauxite in the Northwest, and they had a lot of coal in the Northwest. So they built a bunch of coal plants to power aluminum plants. And that created a lot of emissions, hundreds of millions of tons of emissions. It's a big part of China's carbon debt is their aluminum sector. But then in 2012, something happened. They opened the Three Gorges Dam. And subsequently, they've opened more gigawatts of capacity of hydro in the Southeast. And so they started building aluminum plants in the Southeast. And they started shutting down the least efficient, highest emitting aluminum plants and coal plants in the Northwest. And they started building lots of wind, solar, and putting in batteries for firming in the Northwest. So the plants in the Northwest are now buying a lot more green electrons. And then, well, they have a whole bunch of domestic aluminum scrap. So they're up to 11 million tons of their demand is being met by aluminum scrap now. And it's likely to hit 25 million tons annually by about 2040. That means, most of the ones that came on, about a third of their aluminum manufacturing capacity is now in the Southeast. And I did a curve for carbon emissions in China for the aluminum sector. And it probably plateaued in 2023, 2024, because they're still increasing aluminum production. So they're increasing aluminum manufacturing. Their emissions plateaued 2 to 3 years ago, and they're going to start falling rapidly through 2040. My projection is they're going to be down to about a third to a fifth of what they are today. So amazing good news story out of China. They've turned the corner on aluminum emissions. They make 60% of the aluminum in the world. If you have products in your home that have aluminum in them, from the odds that they're made in China is very high, and they're becoming lower carbon. So global good news story. And it's also a story of industry moving to where clean electrons are. Germany's industrial base is suffering right now because it was entirely based upon cheap natural gas flowing through pipelines from Russia. Now they're suffering because they're doing a lot of LNG from, I'm just going to say, other states which aren't all that stable, somewhat erratic. And so their manufacturing is shutting down, but manufacturing is starting to appear in Spain and Portugal, where they have land and people and lots of wind and solar. So we're starting to see industry shift to where clean electrons are. Okay, more drones. I spoke to a guy named Arthur Erickson, not Canada's Arthur Erickson, but a Texan aerospace engineer who founded Hylio. Hylio makes 14-foot diameter heavy lift drones that carry 200 pounds, about 90 kilos of agricultural products, and spray them autonomously with precision agriculture techniques on routes that were put into the drone's guidance systems the night before at a farm table or at the offices of the drone spraying company. 2 of them cost about 200 grand and spray as much ground as a 700,000 John Deere tractor in a day. They sip electricity instead of guzzling diesel. They don't compact soil. They can be used when the ground is wet to apply fungicides to important places. And the rotors blow the spray down among the roots of the plants, preventing overspray. So they replace crop spraying. They go exactly around the areas of the field. They can go under power lines at the edge of the field. They can get the corners that are hard to get to for helicopters. They reduce crop spraying product use by 30 to 50%. Drone spraying increases overall yield by about 3 to 5% for global metrics, and they use less product to do it. Product that includes the biggest problem we've got, which is nitrogen-based fertilizers made from ammonia, which is made from natural gas or coal. And so this reduces product use, increases crop yield, virtuous stuff. DGI, back to China, indicates that a full third of Chinese agricultural fields are sprayed by their drones. This is a major growth area. If you live in an agricultural area and you don't have a drone spraying service provider and you know somebody entrepreneurial, tell them about this and get them to start a drone spraying drone spraying service. I was just talking to a guy who works at Vancouver Community College yesterday at the conference I was at, and he went, "Oh my God, I want to start that business." I said, "Fill your boots. Here's what I would do." So, and then there's agrigenetics. Pivot Bio, who I spoke to the PhD geneticist Karsten Temme, who co-founded it. He and his partner turned off the nitrogen sensing switch on soil nitrogen fixing microbes that grow in the biome around corn roots. The microbes have a nitrogen sensing switch, so that if we apply fertilizer, they turn off. They just get fat, happy, and multiply. The roots emit glucose to feed the biomes. The microbes provide nitrogen to the roots in symbiosis. Turning off the switch means 30% reduction in ammonia-based fertilizers for nitrogen over 30 million acres of US corn crops right now. Huge, huge win. That's natural gas that doesn't get consumed and turned into ammonia, and that's a reduction in nitrous oxides from the decomposition of ammonia-based fertilizers on fields, which have a global warming potential, I think 265. So we're winning the war on precision agriculture, and we're winning the war on nitrogen-based fertilizers and the carbon bomb that they represent, and we're reducing overspray and other environmental impacts. Okay, 3 different patterns. The first pattern is modular and permissionless. In Pakistan, the government got out of the way. It didn't get in the way, and stuff just happened. East Africa, they're just importing solar and electric motorcycles and hammering up and putting up, solar canopies and plugging them into charge, and it's just happening. Then there's the infrastructure stuff where institutions like Norway, Norled, and other companies, the 1 or 2 other firms are just hammering in electric ferries. In China, 365 gigawatts of pumped hydro in operation, in construction, or planned to start construction by 2030. There's the unlockers, transmission, the big unlocker. Thermal energy storage, a big unlocker. Centralized grid planning. Europe is now going to have a centralized grid architect planning the scenarios for transmission and where energy will flow to and from for all of Europe instead of the bottom-up parochial planning system. So there's 3 different patterns. As you look around the world at something, this is kind of a useful lens to look at that. And last slide. We're there. Our major projects office has a bunch of headline stuff in it that doesn't make any sense and mostly won't come to fruition. My projection is only a third of the LNG plants will actually be built, and a bunch of them, and even then, of capacity, and even then, one of them is going to be out of business in 2041. The one in Squamish, but they've got ports. They've got a bunch of stuff in there for electrification of ports. They've got billions that can be acquired in addition to the port that has a major projects office. They've got a bunch of stuff in there for transmission. Crown corporations can now use clean electricity tax credits for transmission, unlocking a whole bunch of projects for final investment decision and enabling projects that are the incremental backbone for a cross-Canada HVDC grid. And then there's stuff for mines. There's mining stuff in the major projects office. In the budget, there's an entire critical mineral strategy. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there for critical minerals mining for the electrified economy. And this is all in the budgets that exist today. There's billions there to be capitalized upon to make us into an electro-state, not a petro-state. So the future's already here. And so the question for each of you is, in your region, what are you going to choose to pick and to pull those pockets of the future in and to maximize those and to get them going? Because we don't have to invent much new, and there's infrastructure funding and stuff to take advantage of. Questions? You're on mute.
Let's get back
Martin.
on.
Okay. Yep.
Thank you, Michael. What's encouraging is that that's all good news. I've been criticized recently for emphasizing all the bad stuff that's going on, but everything you've been talking about is really encouraging. I mean, it's really brilliant. So we do have some questions. I've got 2 people with their hands up, 3 people with their hands up, but I'm going to look at the Q&A first of all. Perhaps some of the questions are really commentary, but Bob Garson, who I know knows a lot about agriculture, is asking, are you familiar with the Dryland Solution Initiative? Desert and poor soil areas are turned into lush grassland, farmland, sorry.
I didn't talk about this, but China is reforesting enormous amounts of stuff. They've got, and some of that is because that under Mao, one of Mao's stupid initiatives was massive deforestation, but they've reforested an area of land much greater than the size of France. In Africa, we have a green wall and ecosystem emerging to keep the Sahara back. Just as in China, it's keeping the Gobi Desert back. And so rewilding places, restoring grasslands, restoring forests, and making land that is currently marginal more productive is going on around the world. The specific one you refer to, I'll look it up. I hadn't looked at that specific thing, but one brain, one pair of eyes.
And then Letitia has a question, really about electrification. And so it has to be obviously produced from non-carbon sources. So we've talked a lot about electrification and how, on the end use side, how efficient it is and how effective it is. Is it everywhere where you see electrification that you actually have generation from clean sources, or is there a bit of a disconnect and therefore, an aspect which is really not being taken into account?
Mostly that's a red herring. 2 reasons. The first is, let's take electric cars. You have to be on a grid that is solely powered by coal in order for an electric car to be worse than an internal combustion car. And 2, as any grid decarbonizes, if you're running a heat pump or you're running an electric car, the electric car gets lower carbon to operate every single year. So if you own a car for 8 years, at the end of 8 years, it's going to be emitting less CO2 per kilometer. So it's not a chicken or egg. It's not which comes first. Do both.
Okay, now I'm going to switch now to the people who've got their hands up. So Samir, you're top left on my screen. There you go. Do you have a question for Michael?
Yes. China is capitalist. We all know this special implication of capitalism, and we are the same at our core. The only thing I see that there is gold talking here. It's a diamond. I cannot really say for 2 hours how much appreciate what he shared with us. But these are not secrets for someone who wants to search for them. So the question is, what's wrong with Canada? Is it politicians? Is it the system? Or is it people? Or all of this? I don't know, where are we? Are we now, based on all this information, and I know I've been a couple of times in China, by the way, are we becoming developing country, considering the way how we celebrate our free market and our capitalism? I don't know, where are we? Because always I have that question. What's wrong with us? Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, it's a great question. I'm going to ask you a question and ask you to all of you to hold a number in your head, and then I'm going to tell you a story. What is the percentage of GDP from oil, gas, and coal in Canada? So somebody went to one of the preeminent business schools in Toronto and asked all the students that. And the lowest answer was 30%, and the highest answer was 60%. And the actual answer is 5%. We are being fed a line that the fossil fuel industry is a much greater portion of our industrial and economic base than it is. And so our voters are being predisposed to value it much more greatly and believe that the harm of moving off of it is much greater than it is. And so we have to change that narrative. The second point I'd like to make on that is that one of the little known things about the Trudeau government over the 10 years that he was in power significantly diversified Canada's economy. He massively increased the amount of our GDP that was from diverse sources. Montreal, especially, is a global center of AI excellence. 2 of the 3 top people from AI are from Montreal or are still in Montreal. We've got the Digital Twin Center out here in British Columbia. The 5 things, they were imperfect, but he created industrial eco clusters with his policymaking in 5 different areas that made sense. Montreal got AI, we got digital twins because of all of our video game people, and that helped. So he's leaving Carney with a much stronger and more resilient economy, and the Liberals got no credit for that. So any partisan conservatives who are on there, well, sorry, Trudeau did good things for the economy. So the narrative is wrong. The narrative about fossil fuels and energy is wrong. The understanding of where Canada's actual economic strength is wrong. And so there's some basic communication, but I will say that as a progressive, I've been just as guilty as anybody else of assuming if we just share reality with people, they'll get it and they'll make the right decision. No. Moral foundations communication is necessary. There's a professor out of the States, I'm terrible with names. The book is about moral foundations. You can look it up. It's a bit too US centric, but it's got good lessons. It says there's about 6 moral foundations that we make decisions on. And progressives, well, we care about equity and fairness and stuff like that. And we tend to communicate that, but we're speaking to the choir. Well, people with a more conservative mindset, well, that's because progressives value those 2 above. Am I visible here? Yeah, value those 2 above the other 6. So they weight higher in our decision making. But conservatives weight the things more evenly. So authority and sanctity are more important to them. And so the coaching I give for anybody who's communicating is pair moral foundations in any messaging you have. I've got an article on this. You can look it up, Michael Barnard, Moral Foundations. And it'll give you the examples and the name of the author and stuff like that. But pair one of the fairness and equity value propositions to keep us engaged, to keep the progressives engaged, with one of the other moral foundations to pull in the more conservative people so we don't ignore them. And just do that in your messaging, and we can overcome some of the messaging problems. Okay, enough said about communication. Next question.
Rebecca, take yourself off mute. You're on. Rebecca?
Yep, here I am. Thank you. Thank you. Michael, this is the second time I've seen you speak. I was at the Cafes Forum about a month ago, and I wasn't going to miss this, having heard you there. So thank you so much. You absolutely did not disappoint. This is just such important and valuable information, and I can't believe how you can communicate so much in such a short period of time. I have 2 questions, but I'm going to ask the one that I find
an answer to that. I leave out enormous amounts of stuff. Any one of these topics, I could go for.
Of course,
I could give a 3-hour lecture on.
I know, and I wish you would. And if you do, please let us know. I live in Ottawa, and we are a city of 2,800 square kilometers.
Yep.
So that's a lot of land, and there are
love
lots.
The city. Spent a lot of time there.
Yeah, lots of opportunities to do a much better job with a nature-based, nature-positive economy here. But one of those opportunities could be in mass timber. Now, we don't have anywhere near probably the forest stocks required within the boundaries of the city of Ottawa. And of course, there are constraints to be able to support industrial production, even at that regional plant scale that you've been talking about. But I think on a regional basis, we could be sort of a consolidator and perhaps an industrial center to draw on regional wood fiber. So my question is, how do you get the analysis done? We have better inventory now because the Ontario government has required inventory associated with fire protection. So, so we have better inventories now for the sort of urbanized areas, including Ottawa, and we've got the inventory that forest companies have, of course, in the forest management areas. But if we wanted to just knock up some numbers, you know, fairly crudely to start having these conversations with council and with the economic development folks at the city, how would we do that? Do you have any ideas, any people to point to?
I have two answers for you, two easy
Okay.
answers. Three answers. One, regionalized mass timber hubs is exactly the right choice. It'll be,
Yeah, for
there's
sure.
a great opportunity for one in Ontario. I probably wouldn't put it in Ottawa. It doesn't have the history, but there is an answer for Ottawa. Second, pick up my report, my industrial report on mass timber last year. It's like Michael
Yeah.
Barnard, Mass Timber, Clean Technica, and you'll find it. And you can read all about mass timber, different segments, fire stuff. You'll see lots of
Right.
examples in there. Third, I
Mhm.
think Ottawa's opportunity here, mass timber is a high digital automation
Mhm.
solution. And so
Okay.
Canada's strength in the digital economy it could become the software provider for Canada's digital infrastructure for mass timber, because you have to do BIM integration, you have to share stuff across there. That could be a real way for Ottawa to participate in this. The fourth thing I would suggest, I walked around the Federal Agricultural Innovation
The
plots.
smart farm? No.
Yeah, the smart farm, and
Mhm.
just there's a huge farm that's just an experimental farm. And
Oh,
so
the
one of the
experimental farm, right? Okay.
So one of the things I would recommend is going to the, you've got so many federal agencies there, and go and find the one that deals with lumber and timber and start exploring, what are the best breeds, what are the time frames, because harvesting wood we now know we're harvesting it too soon, but harvesting wood for plywood on steroids is likely a different time frame and economic perspective than harvesting it for other purposes,
Mhm.
than for
Yeah.
softwood lumber
Yeah.
and stuff
Yeah.
like that. So
Lower grade wood is possible. Yeah.
and to be clear, I could be wrong about it being the right place to put a regional thing, but maybe just north of it in Quebec, in the Canada, in the other side of the river. I don't
Yeah.
know. I'd have to think
Yeah.
about that one. I'd have to look at some maps of where the boreal forest is, where the nearest lumber mills are. And do find the
Right.
nearest lumber mills. And if there's a lumber town nearby, and then Ottawa gets behind revitalizing that lumber mill with this, and then starts the industrial strategy of providing
Yeah.
building buildings with mass timber as a
Yeah.
customer,
Mm.
get city council to commit to all its new building to be mass timber.
Mm. Yeah. The Enbridge, the new Enbridge Operations Center in Ottawa is built from mass timber
Yep.
from St. Thomas, Ontario. There's a plant there. Okay. Well, thank you for that. That's very rich. I have another question, but I'll just ask it really quickly. You
I'm
sound
going to
very
ask. I'm going to give somebody else a chance if
okay.
there's time at
All
the
right.
end. I'm
Fair
going to
enough.
stick
Yeah.
on
Thanks.
until 12:30 my time. But
Yeah,
next
let's
That's
question.
good. Thank you.
let's pass to Jim. Do you want to pose your question? There you go.
Sure.
Yes, just once again related to timber, I missed the very beginning of your presentation, but I was just curious, and it kind of ties into with the last question. What do you think the impact would be, though, if we're switching more to that type of technology? I understand there's less of a carbon debt there than, say, with steel, but if you have from what I've read, there's been less replanting than there has been marketing of timber crops, and even with the replanting, you're creating a monoculture, and which is less beneficial for wildlife. And if there would be, any consideration for the overall negative impact of the environment in that regard?
Sure. So part of the argument for mass timber is that it's a high-tech, high-margin product, which gives the forestry industry the money and capital they need to invest in their forestry stock. Right now, we've been sinking to the bottom. We're at the point where Drax in Scotland is wood chipping lumber and sometimes raw logs to pelletize them to be burned in thermal heat plants in Scotland. It's a very low margin thing. In some cases, raw logs in BC are being exported to Japan to turn into toothpicks. We're sending 2x4s as low value 2x4s to the United States for framing material. So we upskill all of the, we upskill and up revenue and up profit the forestry industry in Canada, and it can then has the money to invest in the appropriate silvicultural needs to do the things right. Right now, we've been starving the industry and we've been demonizing it, but it's a vastly superior choice. No matter, I'm just going to say this, like wind turbines and solar panels and landfills, it's so vastly better per megawatt hour than coal or natural gas that the absolutely, the perfect is the enemy of the absolute absurdly better. And so mass timber construction is so absurdly better that we have the opportunity to truly do that and invest in the forests. So that's my answer. It's forest investment.
And new technology as well is present, I think, to reduce the carbon imprint
absolutely,
of concrete production and whatnot.
But Jim, there are other, I've got an entire report on cement. You can look up my name and cement, the gray glue, Beyond Portland, Michael Barnard, Beyond Portland. You can read my cement report. Mass timber is one of the levers we use to get out of the cement bomb problem. Next question.
David, do you want to ask a question?
Thank you, Michael. That was fascinating. I have, I guess, a comment and a question tied together. That when you were talking about your filters, about will it work, will it compete, will humans accept it? What immediately came to my mind was a fourth that was about who has the power to get in the way of it. And in Ontario, that by 2040. 70% of our electricity generation is going to be based on nuclear reactors. My question is that a pocket of the future or is that a lock-in of the past?
That is a lock-in of the past. I like nuclear energy. It's good for up to about 40% of a grid before its inflexibility, economic and technical inflexibility, starts creating distortions in the grid. Ontario has too much generation per year of nuclear. It should be trimming it out and letting things retire and replace and building wind and solar instead. But I will say the following: 70% won't be from nuclear by 2040 because of the following thing. Nobody has built a nuclear plant in Ontario for decades. All the people who know how to build nuclear plants are retired or dead. The nuclear plants they're planning to build aren't can-dos, so nobody here knows how to build them or operate them. The small modular reactor is a first of a kind of an unproven design that isn't going to be, coming out. It's not even an approved and certified design. So it's good. It's all going to delay. Professor Bent Flyvbjerg, author of How Big Things Gets Done, categorization of projects by likelihood to go over budget and over schedule. And nuclear is at the bottom. It's one of the worst, and small and first of a kind are even worse. So it's like multiplying risk factors. You're not going to see hit 70% by 2040 because it's not going to be there. And this is where it gets hung up. What I say about nuclear globally is that it is that most conservative politicians are no longer allowed by the public to pretend climate change isn't happening. And they're mostly required to pretend they're doing something about climate change. Nuclear is the mechanism by which they can appeal to the people who want to believe they have a climate plan by putting in low carbon, by promising low carbon generation, and not have to change anything and just burn more gas. Doug Ford is that politician. My Toronto buddy Paul Martin says Doug Ford is a climate change denier who just pretends he's not. That's what's happening in Ontario right now. You need to change your government in order to get sensible energy policy. I would encourage everybody to be communicating through the moral foundations lens to bring the Conservatives in Ontario on side, and maybe encourage Doug Ford to run for Prime Minister. Get him out, make him stop being Ontario's problem.
Okay, Jennifer, you're on next.
Oh, I have two questions. One is related to what was just asked, and I was going to leave it be because David spoke, because he's done a lot of work on nuclear issues. You did say early on in your presentation, which like others, I found fabulous, although I have some quibbles with a couple of parts of it.
Of course.
And one of the things you said was if it's cheap and does the job, then it will scale. And we're not seeing that with nuclear. It's not cheap. It's not going to do the job, but they are already investing billions in it. But this isn't the main issue that I want to address. And
Okay.
You can come back to it if you like. I'm sitting on an organic farm in central Ontario at the moment, my son's farm. And when I heard you say that about drone applications of pesticides and nitrogen fertilizers being the wave of the future, it scared the bejesus out of me. I'm very concerned. I'm also a beekeeper. I'm very concerned about the impacts of pesticides on pollinators, which are disappearing dramatically quickly, birds too. I'm concerned about the impacts on soils. It's nice to have a technology that doesn't compact soils in the way that tractors do, for example, and that can apply certain kinds of materials in
Is there a question
wet
coming?
seasons and so on. Yeah, my question is, I think you need to consider, I want you to speak to the consideration of other factors besides the emissions impacts of these kinds of technologies to do things that we're already doing that are very destructive to the environment in general.
Sure. As I said at the beginning, people have to accept it, and nobody's going to accept 6 billion people dying. Artificial fertilizers and products are necessary to provide the calories that we have today. You're not going to change that system globally. We can disagree on that. And, so I've looked at agriculture globally, and I know the intensity that is required to feed 8 billion people. And I know that you can't do that with the labor forces required for organic farming. So we can agree to disagree on that. On nuclear, nuclear does work, and it can be reasonably priced. It has been reasonably priced in the past. There are 6 conditions for success. No country in the world has created all those conditions of success, including China. I'm actually included in Brent Fluebjerg's How Big Things Get Done in Chapter 9, What's Your Lego? Because of my study of the natural experiment of renewables versus nuclear in China. Here are renewables. Here's nuclear in terms of growth year over year. It's flat. Even China can't overcome the problems with scaling nuclear rapidly. It's under 2% of their total grid capacity. It's under 9% of their total generation annually, whereas renewables in a much shorter period of time have scaled to 50% of grid capacity. So clearly, nuclear can work. It does work in Ontario. It does work in France. It does work in South Korea. But you need the conditions of success to expand it, and no country is admitting the conditions for success and developing them. And so that means it's not going to be economically competitive. I think of it as it's a distraction. I literally, in my short list of climate actions that will work, I say, ignore distractions, nuclear energy. Some people aren't going to, mostly conservatives who just don't want to do anything. So next question.
Why don't we go to Karen? Why don't you ask your question? Samir, you've already asked one. I'd like to move to people and give other people a chance. So Karen, go ahead.
Okay, I'm so impressed with your knowledge. I'm just amazed. Anyway, I want to know your thoughts on wind.
I don't have kids, and I don't follow major league sports, so I have lots more time to think. And
Well, thank you for that, because you're doing a great service to all of us who want to learn. What's your thoughts on wind turbines, and where will all the batteries be recycled or repurposed?
Wind turbines are going to be only next to solar energy as the primary sources of energy in the world. About 80% to 90% of all energy in the world will be provided by those two modes. Wind turbines are incredible, one of the most innocuous forms of energy generation that we've ever invented. They don't kill, they kill almost a vanishingly small number of birds and almost no endangered species. They don't cause human health impacts. They a ton of a megawatt hour of coal emits 4,000 to 8,000 times the mass as a megawatt hour from wind energy, and the 4 to 8,000 times of mass is volatile. It is greenhouse gases. It is sulfur. It is mercury. It is radioactive emissions. It is fly ash. It's just a toxic waste. This is once again, people who complain about wind turbines, they complain about them because they can see them and then they ascribe idiotic things to them. Like people who have husbands who snore, then blame the wind turbines for their husband snoring and them losing sleep. I've looked at, like, Ontario is just a hotbed for this nonsense. So I've written a lot about that. So wind turbines, great. What was the second question?
Battery recycling, was it?
Battery recycling. So battery recycling startups are having a major problem right now. It's just a really serious problem. The serious problem is that batteries in cars are lasting twice as long as we expected them to, and then startups are starting up to remove them and package them for behind-the-meter storage and grid storage and to get another 15 years out of them. So all the volumes of batteries that we were expecting to have going to battery recycling instead just keep working for 30 to 40 years. And so then we're going to have this big surge of recycling. But right now, we're just using them. So I talked to a couple of the battery reuse people and repackaging people at the conference this week. So it will be done. We're struggling. Next.
Alan, do you want to give your question? I think we're going to have to draw it to a close fairly soon. Perhaps Alan first and then Jim, I think, has his hand up as well.
Yes, thank you, Michael, for a very interesting presentation. I think, well-known review called Nature recently published an article entitled, "Can the Clean Energy Revolution Save Us from Climate Catastrophe?" And you have clearly pointed out to a lot of very interesting clean energy revolutions. My question is, but can it save us from catastrophe if at the same time there is an increase in fossil fuel production, which is what we're seeing in Canada?
Oh, I know, but production does not equal demand. So Canada is suffering from an illusion that global markets are going to be growing and demand is going to be increasing for fossil fuels. In 2025, both India and China reduced their importation of LNG by double digits. In India, they reduced their natural gas generation by 35%. This is not a story of growth. Coal generation in China plateaued 2 years ago. So we're seeing, and then Pakistan, it actually had signed long-term contracts with Qatar for LNG, and it was trying to find 24. It was trying to find new buyers for 24 shiploads of LNG from Qatar last year because it didn't need it. The solar that's going in, the solar and batteries that are going in globally are killing the LNG market. Just when Canada is building them. I was just discussing this with an engineer. Right now, as we move forward in time, we're already at peak oil demand. We're at peak diesel demand in North America and Europe several years ago. We hit peak diesel demand last year in China. We hit peak gasoline demand in China 2 years ago. And those are the major consumption areas. So those are now in decline, structural in decline. The emerging world is leapfrogging to electrified transport because they don't have the expectations of 2,000-kilometer road trips in land yachts. So we have a very different emerging world transportation economy that I've been, stepping through. So there's this delusion. Now, the next piece for Canada specifically, as oil demand decreases, the most expensive oil to extract and process and refine will be first off the market. And that's heavy sour crude from Alberta, Mexico, and Venezuela. All the stuff that's being touted recently, it's been in the news. So Alberta's product is going to be first off the market. My projection is the Trans Mountain pipeline will never reach full capacity. It'll be at about half capacity in 2035 and bankrupt in 2040. The Squamish LNG port that's going in with about 2 million barrels per annum has a 15-year contract. When that 15-year contract is up, it won't find new buyers and it'll go under. And the two that haven't reached final investment decision yet, representing about 30 million tons per annum, won't reach final investment decision. There's a irrational bubble around fossil fuel growth that is dissolving before people's eyes.
Wow. Jim, do you want to? I think we need to wrap it up for 1.5 hours.
You know what? You know what? Jonathan's been waiting patiently, and I was as an organizer. Jonathan, why don't you go ahead? Thank you so much. Yeah.
Okay. First of all, thank you for a great presentation. I had installed solar panels on my home 2 years ago, and I'm very happy with it. It's a real win-win situation. But I'm very surprised and upset that hardly anybody else installs solar panels on their rooftops. And I was wondering if you have any advice for how we can try and change the situation.
So thing one, just you've got solar panels on the roof. They're now normal. So your neighbors are going to see they're normal. And you can share with them your vastly reduced electricity bills in a time when people are concerned about the cost of energy. Two, do go to the moral foundations piece and think about how you can articulate stories that appeal to conservatives about this. Three, what you want to do is go to the city and reduce regulations which make it difficult to put them in place. Australia is the classic example. They made it easy for people to put solar panels up, and so everybody did. It's barriers. I'll give you another example. In the UK, they have massively increased the penetration of heat pumps every year by removing 2 regulations. They said, okay, originally you have to be a meter from the property line for installation of a heat pump, and you can only install 1 heat pump. And that was for noise concerns. They changed all that to a 43 decibels outside your neighbor's window rule. And so it's a performance-based rule. And now all of a sudden, with our modern, quiet heat pumps, everybody can put the heat pumps right up against their fences, and they can be practically underneath the neighbor's window, and they can put 3 of them in if that's what the thermal load is required. And that removal of regulations. So analyze the regulations in the city you live in to see if there are barriers like that. Get ChatGPT to help you. And then go to council and say, fix these, turn these into performance-based things like the UK did with heat pumps, like Australia did with solar panels.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, Jim, do you want to have the last word? We're at 90 minutes. I think we need to close. We need to draw it to a close.
It's middle of my lunch hour, so.
Thank you, Michael, so much. That was brilliant as usual. Really appreciate your knowledge of so many issues. Yeah, we look forward now. If everybody keep in mind that Michael will be back in exactly, well, I think it's 28 days because February's a short month. So he's going to do part 2 of this on March 27th, same time. And let's get a real gang out for that one.
But remind me what the heck topic I'm speaking about in a month, and so they would know. And me too.
Let's see. I've got to go back and find it.
You've got too many topics available, Michael.
Yes, it's in the posting, so we'll I'm sure we'll have a ton of fun with it. It's let's see if I can find it that fast. I think you were on to, this was the start of pockets, and then you were on to Canada more. Although you managed to touch on Canada quite a bit. So I think we'll be
Okay.
I'm sure with this group, I'm sure you'll find lots to talk about.
Absolutely.
So I'd like to add my thanks as well. This is one of the best presentations, Michael. It's always amazing the kind of data and information you managed to pull together in a coherent way. So thank you again for that. So gentlemen, ladies, I think that's it. Thank you for coming. And thanks once again to Michael.
Thanks all. Cheers.